This is Ghazaros Kademian's 100th birthday party in Glendale. Not many people survived to 100. Even fewer survived the first genocide of the 20th century and then made it into the 21st century. But this is more than just a story of what Kademian went through to turn 100. It's a story about what he tried to do from his 100th birthday to the age of 101. Get his adopted country to officially recognize the genocide he survived. It's a story of how Kademian the Crusader and others fought and have fought for that recognition. And it's a story of how Kademian the survivor died, never seeing the inhumanity that left him orphaned as a boy acknowledged by the perpetrators or the descendants of the perpetrators. But April 29, 2007, 2 days before his 100th birthday, was a time to celebrate life.
Մեկ նորդուն մշներ էինք երկու տարվա ուրեմն անգեդո եկան ջենդերմեները հայրգիս պրդեցին հայրգիսել մամային կանչեց մաման ասա որ գնասավ ինչ-որ ոսկեղին ունիք և այլեն հավաքեպ էր վերջի ջենտելմենները եկան գինիկները մեկ կողմ երեխաները և տղամարդիկն ալ մեկ կողմ տղամարդոցը պրդեցին դարին
I don't know what your secret is, but all I can say is I hope I look half as good as you when I'm 60. There must be something about the most difficult of beginnings of one's life that builds strength and builds character and tenacity and a will to go on, and you are a living embodiment of the reason why it's so important, both here in the United States and around the world, that we recognize the genocide that claimed so many of your family and so many of the relatives that your children and grandchildren never got the chance to know. On behalf of the United States Congress, I want to congratulate you for 100 extraordinary years and present you with this United States flag that was flown over the Capitol in your honor. Congratulations.
You're a hero for us, and it's likely and it's fit that you're sitting next to one more of our Armenian heroes, Adam Schiff, who's done so much for the Armenian community worldwide by pressing and pushing and fighting to have the Armenian Genocide resolution put forth to the floor of the House of Representatives, and I'm sure that he'll succeed with all of our help. And finally, Turkey will be forced to admit, and the U.S. will recognize the crimes that they committed.
Today, through history, I've learned about the Armenian Genocide, and I'm so proud of Adam Schiff and what he's doing, because one day this country will recognize the genocide and Turkey will admit that there was a genocide.
But the greatest honor that we can bestow upon Ghazaros Kademian is to pursue the cause of justice that embodies this man. So let us honor him tonight with our presence, and let us honor Ghazaros Kademian every day by our work, by our commitment to have the faith of Ghazaros Kademian, the sacrifice of Ghazaros Kademian, the dedication of Ghazaros Kademian, and the iron will of Ghazaros Kademian.
Less than 2 months after turning 100, Ghazaros Kademian was a special guest at the Navasartyan Games, organized by the Armenian General Athletic Union and Scouts of the Western United States. Commonly referred to as Homenid Men, the region boasts 18 chapters and 7,000 members. This annual athletic showcase attracts 300 teams, more than 3,000 athletes, and some 35,000 spectators over the 4th of July weekend. That large crowd showed its respect and enthusiasm as the 100-year-old survivor made his way around the track.
Պարկերենք ես անտեղը, ինքնալ աստեղը, իրար գնային կոր։ Ինք ինձ գնայի, ես իրեն գնայեմ, ինք ինձ գնայի, ես իրեն գնայեմ, մեկին դեսա որ աչքը կոծեց։ Եկան քանի մոքի իրեն վերցին դարին։
In October, Armenians around the world watched the House Foreign Affairs Committee debate House Resolution 106. Called H.Res 106 in Capitol Hill shorthand, it would flatly declare that the events of 1915 to 1923 were genocide. The committee was chaired by the only Jewish Holocaust survivor to ever serve in the U.S. Congress, Hungarian-American Tom Lantos.
The controversy lies in whether to make it United States policy at this moment in history to apply a single word, genocide, to encompass this enormous blot on human history.
In 1915, there were about 2 million Armenians living in what was then the Ottoman Empire. They were living in a region that they had inhabited for 2,500 years. By 1923, well over 90% of these Armenians had disappeared. Most of them, as many as 1.5 million, were dead. The remainder had been forced into exile.
4/5 of the Turks, 80%, have said they would oppose helping the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan if this kind of resolution passes. We're in the middle of 2 wars, and we've got troops out there, over there that are at risk. And we're talking about kicking the one ally that's helping us over there in the face right now. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
The audacity that some Turks have had during this debate to threaten to cut logistic support for U.S. troops in Iraq. Isn't it enough that hundreds of our service members may have died due to Turkey's refusal to permit the 4th Infantry Division to transit through Turkey and enter Iraq at the beginning of the Iraq conflict? Is that enough? For the sake of the genocides past and present, I urge the passage of this bipartisan resolution. 1.5 million Armenians were murdered. 500,000 were removed from their homeland. Passing this resolution will be a victory for human rights.
Ms. Giffords votes yes. The new total is 27 ayes and 21 nays.
The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted, and this markup session is adjourned.
After the success in committee, the goal of H.Res 106 supporters was to get the resolution in front of the full House for a vote. Perhaps the U.S. Senate would even take up this issue. But even if that did happen, President Bush would never support such a measure, as indicated by the full court press by his administration to kill it.
This resolution is not the right response to these historic mass killings. And its passage would do great harm to our relations with a key ally in NATO.
Access to airfields and to the roads and so on in Turkey would be very much put at risk if this resolution passes.
From Washington, the McLaughlin Group.
And there were many other voices unsympathetic to the genocide resolution.
Predictions, Pat.
House committee did a terrible thing in accusing Turkey of genocide. It now goes to the floor of the House. It's really damaged our relations with a critical country and a vital ally. I predict the way will be found not to have a vote on that on the House floor.
I was following on what Pat said. There are 226 people who've signed this legislation as proponents of it to call it a genocide of what Turkey did to. It is a disaster for American policy. 8 secretaries of state have come out against it. Everybody is recognizing this is terrible for the national interests of the United States, and it is a function of a special interest group, the Armenian lobby, giving tremendous amounts of money to a lot of Congress people.
To fill you in, this is the Armenian massacre issue.
Sigur İslam bilirler, seçemezler. Երկու ոտքից կապեցին, ոտքից տակը ձեծեցին և մարեցա մնացի, իրեն կացին է, ելը դեսա, որ տուրոպաց է, ծկեցի պխա։ Չկացի հատ քրիստոնյա մարդուն կովոր կմնայի անոր հոր եղբարը ժամակորձ էր ուրեմն ինձ դրավ անդեղը քանի մոր ու ես ժամակորձ տնսուրվեցա և անգևերջի ժամակորձ տուն կնեի ադորը մեծա
Back in 2007, there was still hope. In those days, right after H.Res 106 passed 27-21 in the House Foreign Affairs Committee, city councils in Ghazaros Kademian's backyard began supporting the resolution and honoring him. The Glendale City Council, whose members represent tens of thousands of Armenian Americans, got on board early.
Genocide is genocide, and if we don't pass it now, what are we going to tell Mr. Kademian? That this country that he's come to, that the country that all of us, many of us have come to in one generation or another, doesn't believe in what's right and doesn't believe in humanity.
What takes place even 100 years ago, and we will let them know that they did something wrong, and we will call it for what it really was, a genocide, not a conflict, not a war. It was a genocide.
The city of Los Angeles, which has Yerevan, Armenia as one of its sister cities, also supported H.Res 106.
all of us, including the Turks, do the right thing to see, shed light on this part of history so it never happens again to anyone. Thank you. Continuation of the cycle of violence.
On behalf of the Armenian National Committee and the Armenian American community, thank you for adding this voice of the great city of Los Angeles to all those people and institutions concerned with human rights and the prevention of genocide.
Nice to see you. Thank you so much for being absolutely right. It's wonderful. He has visited now so many times. Such a great man.
And you too for bringing this.
Bless you.
Nice to see you.
And then we need to expand beyond immediate ANC people.
Back in Glendale, at the headquarters of a nonprofit group that focuses on educating legislators about the Armenian Genocide, leaders of the Armenian National Committee of America, or ANCA, gather to draw up a strategy to move H.Res 106 toward wider acceptance in the halls of Congress.
10 to 12 people who are going to be on a blog team that are going to be out there responding and getting commentary into articles, online.
There's been a pro and con. I've seen some great press. I've also seen some, delirious press that, makes us all sick. A Boston Globe editorial, and then you see other editorials, whether it was in the Kansas City Star, the Albany Times Tribune, different papers that are good. So a suggestion has been put on the table to bring on a PR team.
We can't cover the whole world on this, but it's going to be really important that we get out on talk radio on this, because it's already happening and we're getting hammered. So we need to come up with some good spokespeople who could just do phone, be on talk radio, where you're dealing with a host and taking listener questions. I remember, vote happens, we win. Then there's another, I would say, 2 weeks of Turkish spin on this.
And it's very, very important that next 2 weeks for the Senate, if we're going to give it any chance to go in the Senate.
So what we're also doing is cross-referencing that with local activists that we have. The purpose of this will be to get local-oriented articles, meaning why this is important to a local constituency, into that local paper, because the press secretaries of these members read their local papers.
You might be asking yourself why there's such a hang-up over using the term genocide to describe something that happened 100 years ago. To find out, we paid a visit to Armenian-American human rights activist Dr. Hovsep Fidanyan. The iconic Armenian crossstone, or khachkar, in his backyard is a not-so-subtle indication of his dedication to the Armenian cause, as it's called. First on the list for Americans championing the Armenian cause is binding genocide recognition by the United States Congress. But more important, Armenian Americans insist, are recognition, reparations, and restitution by the Republic of Turkey. The truncated tree behind the stone cross, Fidanyan says, appears as a symbolic representation of what happened to the Armenian nation 100 years ago. He's gratified that state legislatures, parliaments, and genocide scholars have deemed what happened to the Armenians a century ago as genocide, but he prefers to go right to the source and end the argument once and for all.
The man who coined the term genocide was Raphael Lemkin, a Polish Jew, a survivor of the Jewish Holocaust. He created the word genocide to describe what happened to the Armenians, Assyrians, Greeks, and other Christian minorities in the Ottoman Empire in the beginning of the 20th century, and subsequently to his own people, the Jews of Europe, during World War II.
Genocide is a new word combining the Greek word genos meaning race or group, with the root of the Latin sidere, meaning to kill. Dr. Raphael Lemkin, who is professor of law at Yale University and specializing in teaching matters about the United Nations. Dr. Lemkin is the man who created the word genocide. Dr. Lemkin, could you give us a little background on how you came to be interested in this genocide?
I became interested in genocide because it happened so many times. It happened to the Armenians, and after the Armenians, Hitler took action.
Lemkin became the leading force behind the drafting and adoption of the International Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, adopted unanimously by the United Nations General Assembly in Paris on December 9, 1948.
Yes, Lemkin was Jewish, yet the State of Israel has not acknowledged the historical fact of the Armenian genocide due to geopolitical considerations. That in itself is a tragedy. Many Israeli politicians disagree with that policy of denial, but still there is no acknowledgement by the Knesset of Israel, a country made up of survivors and descendants of survivors of the worst genocide in world history. Well, on the eve of the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, it's time that the world over people know what happened and recognize what happened to the Armenian people was a genocide. Period. The list of eyewitnesses, intellectuals, political figures, researchers, academicians who acknowledge the veracity of the Armenian genocide is exhaustive and irrefutable. But perhaps even more credible was the New York Times that published the first rough draft of history as it was happening, publishing 145 articles about what befell the Armenians when 65 to 70% of the Armenian people the world over were exterminated. 82% of the Armenians in Western Armenia, as I like to call it today, occupied Western Armenia, were massacred and destroyed by the cruelest means possible, thus depriving the nation of its homeland. September 25th, 1915, 450,000 killed in recent massacres, 600,000 driven into exile. September 30th, 1915, wholesale murder in Armenia. November 1917, Armenians killed with axes by Turks. July 1919, even the new Turkish government of Turkey condemns its war leaders for massacres. The fact is that Adolf Hitler took his cues from Talat Pasha, one of the three masterminds of the Armenian Genocide. Destroy completely all of the Armenians living in Turkey. An end must be put to their existence, however criminal the measures taken may be. No regard must be paid to either age or sex, nor to conscientious scruples. So said the Ottoman Empire's Minister of the Interior, Talat Pasha. Then you had Hitler, some 23 years later, saying, "I have given orders to my death units to exterminate without mercy or pity men, women, and children belonging to the Polish-speaking race. It is only in this manner that we can acquire the vital territory which we need." After all, who remembers today the extermination of the Armenians? As we approach the 100th anniversary, we need to put the controversy to rest of whether what befell the Armenians was a genocide, and inform the world that on April 24th, 1915, the top 300 Armenian leaders and intellectuals were rounded up in Istanbul, or what was then called Constantinople, and summarily executed. Winston Churchill did not mince words when he used the word Holocaust prior to the coinage of the word genocide. Way before World War II, in the 1920s to be exact, Churchill wrote his classic 5-volume series, The World Crisis, about World War I, from its origins to the long shadow it cast after the so-called Great War ended. In Volume 4, The Aftermath, Churchill wrote, "As for the Turkish atrocities, helpless Armenian men, women, and children together, whole districts blotted out in one administrative holocaust. These were beyond human redress." Anyone with a sense of decency or a modicum of humanity must spread Lemkin's word genocide in its intended context and put this ridiculous debate to rest.
As 2007 turned into 2008, the hope H.Res 106 inspired for recognition by the full House of Representatives was fading. That didn't stop Armenian Americans in April 2008 from making their case in state capitals and in city halls across the country. The activists coming from California's Armenian population of about 1 million were the most vocal.
We know that America's strength is our democracy. America is the greatest nation on earth, not because of our guns, not because of our economy. It is because of our ideas, of our liberty, and our freedom.
As a people, we have defeated the sword of the Turk. As a people, we have defeated the burning sands of the Syrian desert. And as a people, we have risen like a phoenix from the ashes of Deir Zor.
America's policy on the Armenian genocide has been concocted, manufactured, and exported from Ankara. America's foreign policy with respect to the Armenian genocide has been cynically wrapped up in the red, white, and blue in Ankara and sent to this country.
My own great uncle, Professor Khachadur Nahigian, was among the first arrested and tortured to death in 1915. But our oppressors could never succeed. They could kill our ancestors. They could steal our land. They could burn our churches. But they could not, they will not, defeat the spirit of our people.
got 2 seats over here.
I'm from Visalia, but I live in Los Angeles.
Fresno.
Representing Burbank today, Pasadena, Hollywood.
Father, I used to think I had a chance of going to heaven before I became a politician.
For so long, many countries have been in denial about the Armenian Genocide. Many people don't want to recognize it, and I think it's incumbent upon a state like California and individual elected officials to say, yes, this happened, this was horrendous, and let's make sure it doesn't happen around the world anymore.
Thank you all very much to all the representatives of the ANC who are here for your constant vigilance and fighting for genocide recognition. This is just another chapter in what we've all been working on collectively for. And I think you saw it in some of the comments that were made today on the floor by so many members of the Assembly who spoke so forcefully about the need for the continuing need for genocide recognition, and also the need for passage of House Resolution 106. So it was a great opportunity, I think, for us to display once again the importance of those things, and all of you are being here played a very important role in our having a very successful day. So I want to thank each and every one of you.
Turkish youth, learn the truth!
Turkish youth, learn the truth!
Turkish youth, learn the truth!
Turkish youth, learn the truth! Turkish youth, learn the truth!
And at the annual demonstration in front of the Turkish consulate in Los Angeles,
I'm Assembly Member Paul Krikorian.
Ghazaros Kademian brought a letter to be hand-delivered to Turkish officials. The letter never made it into the consulate, but it was read to demonstrators.
Armenians are not alone. The soul of 1.5 million innocent massacred Armenians continue to live within our souls. Therefore, we are not alone. And after 93 years of tears, we loudly scream, no more tears. Sincerely, Ghazaros Kademian.
During the entire month of April 2008, right before his May 1st birthday, when he would turn 101, Kademian found himself being honored all over the Los Angeles area. One evening that was particularly poignant was when his fellow Armenian Americans from Iraq made him the center of attention during their genocide commemoration. A highlight that evening was when they sang a song about Kademian's 1907 birthplace in Turkey, a town Armenians call Zeytun, in a place most Armenian Americans still, out of principle and aspiration, call Western Armenia. George W. Bush was on his